Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming today. We have the privilege of the Sac-Joaquin Section Commissioner visiting us today to go over CIF bylaws and regulations, especially as they pertain to eligibility. So without further ado, please let me introduce the CIF Sac-Joaquin Section Commissioner, Mr. Peter J. Saco.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to pull this thing off and talk. Right, I'm the Sac-Joaquin Section Commissioner for 17 more days. Then Mike Garrison will be taking over. You all have two handouts. What I'd like to do, I know most of you in here, be honest with you, I don't recognize every face. Just name, position, school would be of great value, at least as I talk, and I'll be doing some work for the organization in the next year, and if we happen to touch base, then I'll know who I'm dealing with. So I'll start off to my right here. Why don't we go back there? Okay, good. Oh, there we go. Okay, thanks, Mike. Might as well, for the purpose of discussion. And okay, thank you. What I have done for you is I've given you we're going to discuss 4 bylaws today. And you may ask, how come this isn't on a PowerPoint up on the screen? Well, number one, I'm not that savvy this late in the summer. And number two, we just got through producing the new bylaws. So I'm going to talk about a valid change of address. I'm going to talk about a transfer student. I'm going to talk about Bylaw 510, which is our undue influence. I'm going to talk about accurate information or fraudulent information. Let me start by saying, and I know there's some new principals in the room. There's many that have been to my administrative workshops in the fall. And I say this very seriously, and it may come out funny, and it is not intended to be funny. But if you have an English teacher that teaches something maybe or makes a couple comments that's wrong or teaches something not real accurate, you may have, what, 10, 15, 20 parents unhappy. If your football team is 8-0 and you have to forfeit 8 football games, you may not have a job. I mean, I say it very seriously. I've seen it happen over and over again, and we've had some unfortunate situations last year occur in this district, and it sure wasn't a fault. I'm just going to point at them. It sure wasn't a fault of the person at Consumer Soaks, I guarantee you that. But things do happen, and it's extremely incumbent on your part when students transfer. Our society is extremely mobile, that you pay attention, you ask questions, and you try to get the right information. So we as an organization can move forward. I will talk about some of the things we've created during my tenure that will help if mistakes do occur or if there's fraudulent information submitted by a student athlete. But as you well know, a lot of times we can't catch everyone, and sometimes schools or teams do pay the consequences of mistakes of adults and student athletes for that matter. I'm just going to jump right into it. It's the only way I can really operate. Bylaw 206, we talk about, it's on page 2, page 16 at the bottom of the document. Residential eligibility, and it's important to realize what that basically tells you. I wouldn't expect you to read it, but what that is telling you is when the student enrolls in the 9th grade, that is where he is eligible. So I'm going to use a wild example, and I'll come back to a more general example. A student can live in Los Angeles and go to Pleasant Grove every day. He can fly up in the morning, go to school, get on a plane, and fly back. As long as they've got the approval, the district paperwork between Elk Grove Unified and whatever school he's living in LA. Now that may sound pretty crazy, but that's the best example I can give you. Now let's move closer back to home. An incoming freshman could live in Lodi, could live in Galt, could live in the Sacramento City School District, could live in Roseville, Rockland, anywhere, and go to any one of your schools as an incoming freshman as far as we are concerned. Now, your district may not approve it. The district where the student is coming from may not approve it. That is not our issue. The student is eligible the first day when they start the 9th grade. They become under our auspices and a decision made in our office when the student changes schools and the family they are living with basically does not move. If the family moves, it's a valid change, which I'll talk about here in a second, but they really come under our control when the student changes schools and the family does not move. So I think that's critical as we go down the road. So wherever a student enters the 9th grade, they're eligible. On page 17 at the bottom, I've kind of underlined and highlighted a couple things, and I'm just going to use examples, and you all have the same examples. A valid change of address. I moved 2 years ago, and I counted how long it took from the day we said we were going to buy a house. It took me 10 weeks to make the move. So that's a time that, yes, I'm buying this house. I start that paperwork. I put my house up for sale. I sell my house and my move. So when I hear stories that Johnny or Susie have moved in 2 weeks, come on, folks. Unless it's an apartment dweller or it's a straight rental where they can get out and get in, it's just not going to happen. And I'll tell you what, that raises a red flag real fast, especially when I talk to the former school. I talked to a former athletic director, and they say, you know, Pete, that kid was here 3 weeks ago. Everything was hunky-dory. All of a sudden, he had a run-in. Now, all of a sudden, they say they're living over here. I'm not going to buy into it, and I don't think you folks should either, because if you can prevent the problem before it becomes our problem, you're safe, and where the school the student is going to may also prevent some problems for them. So when we talk about a valid change of address, what does CIF require? At the bottom of page 17, those are all the documents we can require. You know, we can talk about a lot of things. I don't know. What do you guys require in your, Hank, what do you require when a new student comes to Pleasant Grove? What about a new address? They moved in from Lodi to your attendance area.
Well, they have to prove or show us a proof of the new address, and they may have to bring in a PG and E bill or something along those, SMUD bill. And there's we have a packet, and there's a whole series of items that they have to bring in. I'm not familiar with all of them, but there's a checklist. They have to show us proof.
Most people will tell me, well, Pete, we require a rental agreement. Okay, fair enough, if they're not buying a house. And they'll tell me what the one I love is, well, PG&E. Let me tell you, in 2007, when the Franklin story broke of Franklin of Stockton, 15 kids, we had 13 kids that had the same PG&E bill with a reauthorization every time. So person A moved into the house, went down and got a PG&E bill. Person 2 went down, got a new PG&E bill. 13 different people had the same address and 13 different accounts. So I went to PG&E and they looked at me and they said, well, that isn't your problem. Well, it becomes our problem because the school site people just see a PG&E bill and they just take it for random. So the last student that enrolled there, that's who is ultimately paying the PG&E bill for that family. The biggest thing that I look for, follow the money. I want to see bank statements. I look for a credit card. I want to see credit card statements. I want to see checking account statements. And I'll tell you what, every time I'm suspicious, and I almost say every time, because I think it's almost been every time, parents can't supply that. Well, we haven't made that change yet. Well, I'm just trying to reflect back on what I did. When I moved, that was the first thing I did. I went to the bank. I got a new checking account, established, got my checks, did all the things that I would do. So there's a lot of documents we put down here, but be aware, if there's an issue with a valid change of address, even my successor will probably be asking the same questions that I'm raising today. What have you done? We may ask the parents to submit more documents to our office to validate that it's a valid change of residence. So CIF lists court documents. They list a ton of stuff there. But to us, bank statements, credit card statements, utility statements we may ask for, but for us, I know those can be as fraudulent as a day is long. So make sure you do your proper protocol and check in on a valid change of residence. Athletic directors, you're the ones on the forefront. When you receive a valid change of residence on a new student, please call the former school, especially if they're in our section. Pick up the phone. If I'm the athletic director at Lodi High and a student moves to Franklin, I'm going to call Mike Cody and say, hey, Mike, you know what? You're going to have a student come in, and you know what? He's okay. The family's selling their house. We knew they were moving. Or I'm going to tell Mike, you know what? There's some issues here. I'm not quite sure that family's made a valid change. We still hold rumors they're living in this house here in Lodi. And the same thing goes the other way. I would expect Mike to call me and say, hey, Pete, are there any questions with this young man or young lady who's moved in? You guys, both genders, know who the quality athletes are. You know the high-profile athletes because your coaches know. Look at the Sacramento Bee today. It's all over the paper on the young man from Consumnes Oaks going to Tokyo High School. It's front page news. Second page, you open it up, it's right there, big article. There you go. There you go. Leaving, not coming. So it's another problem. But it happens. So make the phone calls. Help yourself out on the valid change of address. Because you won't really know if a student's leaving until you see it on our website. For those that aren't aware, when a student changes school in our section, let's say they make a valid change of residence. And let's take the example I just gave you from Franklin to Lodi. On the Lodi High website, it will have John Smith leaving, or former student. And when Mike looks up on his site, it will have the school he's going to. So I know that when I look on, okay, he's left and he's gone to Franklin. When Mike looks it up, it'll say, okay, he's coming to Franklin, he's leaving Lodi. So you can track all the kids that are, as long as they're from our section. If they're from out of our section, I think it says out of our section. That website for the ADs should be extremely helpful. It allows you to monitor your kids and monitor those kids that are leaving. If you have any question, call the office. We'll provide you whatever information we have. That's a responsibility, and Suzanne does a pretty good job of letting you know exactly what's going on with students that are leaving. So make sure you follow up on that. If you take a look on the next page, 18, I've got an asterisk at the top. If a family, and this is very typical in the beginning of the year, it can't happen during the school year, but more typical in the beginning of the year. So we get a phone call, and a student is going to, well, we just bought a house, Mr. Saco, and we're moving in the Elk Grove attendance area October 1st. But our student's going to start school there September or August, whenever you guys start. So he'll be eligible in August. No. He'll be eligible when that family makes the valid change of residence. So if they move in and they're living there October 1st, that's when they're eligible. Even if they're saying, well, we just live in Sacramento, but we want our son or daughter to start school there in August, that's fine. But you're not going to get eligibility until you make the valid change of residence. And last year, not in the sport of football or basketball, but another main sport, we had a student athlete that moved, and we made them sit for about 6 weeks until they were fully in the house, and made the principal was assigned responsibility of checking that, signing a document, and giving to us. A very high-profile athlete. So, you need to make sure. We will follow up on that. So, and there's not even an appeal on that. It is what it is. The student is eligible when the family has completely made the change of address. As you can imagine, if, Mr. Saco let us start there, we'll move in by October 1. Well, October 1 becomes November 1, and then we don't move in the football, volleyball, cross country is over, and the student completed the whole season. So we actually state that on number 5. The kind of parentheses there, a lot of things can happen when a student moves, of which a lot of times people aren't aware of the options. So let me kind of take you through them. You can read that later. You can just glance at it. Jim Smirker moves from school attendance area A to school attendance area B in November. Jim has a number of options. One, he can move and stay at school A for the rest of the year, as far as we're concerned. He may have to get the paperwork between the districts, but he can stay at school A for the rest of the school year, no questions asked. He could also then start school B the following August, no questions asked. That's for academic reasons. So a student, family moves, but they want to stay there and let him finish the academic season. He can do that and then start the new year at school B. Jim can change schools as soon as his families make a valid change of residence. So he's at school A, family moves November 1st, they're in the house, he wants to go to school B November 2nd, he can do it. That's now his school of residence until the family makes another change. Jim can also stay in school A until the end of the school year and enroll at a private school the following year. So he can decide that I want to go to Capital Christian or I want to go to Jesuit the following September. He can do that. He can also, November 1st, go to a private school immediately and become eligible. What Jim cannot do is he cannot finish basketball season and then transfer. He can do that, but now he's going to become subject to our rules and is going to have a sit-out period. So you can't move, finish a sports season, and say, oh, I want to finish basketball here. Now I'm going to jump over to this school and play baseball because I live in that attendance area. You cannot do that. You can do it, but you're not going to be allowed to play baseball. I can guarantee you that. You're going to have a sit-out period, and he's going to have a sit-out period the following year in basketball if that's a sport he was playing when he moved. So if you really think about it educationally, put yourself in your principal's hat on, that rule is there for academic reasons, and it makes all the sense in the world. We'll get a lot of people that say, well, we want to finish basketball and then transfer. You can do it, but you're going to be subject to our rules. So there's a lot of options. A lot of people don't know that. Sometimes you got to check with your kids. You know, a student athlete will be moved in November, very common, November or December, and they'll stay at their school, and then they come into your school to start the school year, and they're immediately eligible, although they moved the following, let's say, winter. They finish the school year at their previous school, and they start the new school with you the following year. They're immediately eligible to play sports. So sometimes you have to ask those questions as well, is when they move, where are they going to school, and what was going on. So kind of confusing, but there are some options, and sometimes they benefit the kids, and it makes sense. Yeah, Doug.
So what you're saying is we need to verify when the move occurred, right. Not just that there's a change of residency, but when that happened, because otherwise, if they just come in and just say, okay, yeah, we just moved, and it was actually 2 months ago, we wouldn't know that. Right,
exactly. So if the family moved in, let's just say the family moves April 1st and finishes the year at Elk Grove High School, and then they roll into your campus in July or August and want to enroll in Laguna Creek, those questions need to be asked. When did you move? You moved into our attendance area in April and you finished at Elk Grove. You kind of need to walk them through it. Okay, you fill out the 206 form, but they're immediately eligible for the following school year. And a lot of times people get caught up in that. They don't understand that, and it's actually there to benefit. It's actually there to benefit the honest kid who's trying to do things the right way. So any other questions on that? Because that can be kind of tricky and helpful, but we try not to let the kids take advantage of that rule as well. If you take a look at 206.2, page 19, we are the only section in the state that has this, and I will say it's a great rule, and I love it. It keeps us out of the news, and it keeps you out of the news. If a student changes schools, and let's say they get lost in the shuffle, and now you're 5 weeks in the football season, and all of a sudden you realize you didn't do a 206 form. Family made a valid change of residence, and you say, it comes up. Maybe the former school calls our office, and we call you. I'm going to use Mike, the former Lodi kid. So I call Mike up. I said, Mike, got this young man that moved in. He's playing football for you. We don't see him anywhere on our website. He says, I'll get back to you. So he calls me back. He says, you know, Pete, the family moved. We just didn't do a 206 on him, but it's a valid change of residence. They came from L.A., got caught in the shuffle, you know, whatever. We did all the paperwork we had to do at the school, but we didn't do a 206. What that bylaw says is everything is above board. We fine you $100, but you do not forfeit any games. So we have tried to protect the school with all the paperwork, and we understand you have a lot of issues on your plate, so we're trying to alleviate some of them. So we would just fine you $100, ask you to submit the paperwork, make sure it's above board, and life goes on. We don't have an issue. I will talk about a bylaw later on where we do a fine system, and the issue can be overturned by my executive committee. And when we first implemented that, we fined the school $1,000. And the superintendent said to me, God bless you, the check will be in your possession in an hour. She says, I now have 500 parents that will be off my back. So I kind of looked at my executive committee when we imposed that rule, and I said, you know, it's working. It's serving its purpose. We need to do something, but it's in our world, it's how do you not penalize kids for adult mistakes? And I found trying to implement a fine does work. All the fine money you ever hear about that comes in the organization goes right to our scholarship program. There's not enough money that comes into it that can help run an organization, especially our size. But we give it back to kids through our scholarship program. So 206.2, I just want to reference that for you, that's there. If you screw up, make a mistake, didn't do the form, you have access to it. Get a hold of us. We'll work our way through it. And if it's just an oversight, you won't be forfeiting any basketball games. Any questions on 206, valid change of residence? You can scan those to Suzanne or email them. And usually she will be the one that will process those unless there's an issue of recruiting or some other form. Now, if you look on the other document I gave you, if you just take a glance at the 206 form, and we've had this discussion with numerous people, there at the bottom, we're asking you to put the parents on the spot. And if you want to attach a document, you've asked us questions, and they've given you the responses that are satisfactory, that's fine. That there's been no contact. Because remember, if a student moves, makes a valid change of residence, but they follow a club coach or follow a high school coach, one high school coach gets suspended from one or leaves one school and goes to another school, and kids follow him and they make a valid change of address, that student is still subject to 1 year ineligibility. You cannot follow a high school coach who's changed, and you cannot follow a club coach who's now your high school coach. You're subject to ineligible for that as well. And you cannot play on the club basketball team with those kids. So you need to ask those questions. I know my friends here at Consumer Oaks are a little gun shy right now. They've made the decision that they're going to attach a form to those. So we're still trying to work our way through it. You have to feel comfortable, but you need to put the parents on the spot, and they need to understand that they need to be honest with you, or if you don't feel confident to submit the form, you tell them we're not going to submit the form. You're not going to play until we know you're telling us the truth. If that means meeting with your coaches and your athletes or calling the former school, here again, I highly recommend you call the former school. You'll probably get more information out of this than you really will know. When I deal with an eligibility case, I call the former school. I tell this story. When I dealt with America Samoa, I got all my information from America Samoa. They provided me everything. They had all the names of all the kids that came to California. It was kind of amazing. We're dealing with people that far around the world that had the same answers, had all the answers that we really needed. So really contact the former schools, and I think that they can help you. 206. Yeah, question.
That's fine. Okay. Concerning the where you talk about no person connected with the athletic department of the new school, part of Booster Club, et cetera, how would that affect open enrollment, students coming in as either upperclassmen or freshmen primarily? I'm looking at freshmen that transfer through open enrollment to a school, and yet are we bound to try and determine has there been contact with a club sport on those freshmen, or is it just, hey, freshmen, they're in, open enrollment?
Traditionally, they're in, Bob, but it doesn't mean that if you have a pattern of behavior, that it needs to be looked at and reviewed. So I've got a couple schools right now that are on the docket for our office that, get a lot of transfers in, and so there's a lot of issues right now with what's going on with those kids. So if all of a sudden the boys soccer program has 9 incoming freshmen that don't live in the Elk Grove attendance area, that's a red flag. You need to contact the office, probably have to come up and spend some time with you, and maybe meet with the parents and try to figure out what's going on. Highly unlikely that those are all there for the same reason. I can guarantee you it's highly unlikely. So, but let's answer that question further. Upper students, juniors, seniors, remember, incoming freshmen don't have to fill out those forms. So that's really going to come from the school. We're going to get, unless we get a phone call or something, we get an array of things, that information submitted to us, and we need to get a hold of you. But upper level kids don't matter. So a junior or senior, if they move and they've played club sports, they got a problem. And I'm going to use the example, and I didn't ask you guys, but this question, I made the presentation at Sheldon on Monday, and one of their coaches asked me the question. I said, that's a fair question, ask it. But the young man that we had at CO last year played club basketball, and the question came from a coach, and it was a pretty valid one. He said, Pete, he played with kids from 4 different schools. I think he mentioned Franklin. I think he mentioned Elk Grove. I'm not sure if he mentioned PG or not. And I says, you know what? According to our rules, that young man would have been eligible at every one of those schools if we had known the information up front. And right, wrong, or indifferent, if you can see the big picture, if we start allowing kids to play for clubs and change schools, we'll become an AAU-run organization, and we won't survive the light of day. So we've enforced this rule. We believe in the rule. The rules is really been tested in court, and it's been upheld more often than not. If you take a look at where we've moved as an organization, I'm going to talk about 207. We have tried to help kids. We've tried to help kids more than people can imagine because we've gone with the sit-out period. So if you go back 10 years ago, when a student transferred for academic reasons, he was ineligible for 1 year. And I can guarantee you, when they appealed, I very rarely lost an academic transfer. I felt bad for some of these kids because I really believe they were more often than not transferring for the reasons they said. Well, now what we have done is we have said, no, everybody's going to have the sit-out unless the situations I'm going to discuss in a couple minutes. But I'm trying to give you an overview. So we've tried to say, no, we're not going to sit you the whole year. You're going to have a sit-out period. But if you're following a coach, you're following a club coach, or there's athletic motivation. I'm playing at Franklin High School, and I tell Mike Cody, the baseball coach, to go to hell and fly a kite. I'm not coming back next year. That's an athletically motivated transfer. And if Mike is willing to come and testify, we will win that appeal every time. If Mike doesn't come and testify, we're probably not even going to go to appeal because I got no legs to stand on. But we will win those appeals if people are willing to step up and testify that there was athletic motivation, and whether it's the parent, student, a lot of times the dad goes in, you guys know the stories, you've been there, tells the football coach, my kid should be running because he's the next starter at USC, but he can't get on the field at your school. Yeah, okay, yeah, I understand. Well, when he leaves a room and he's flying a kite and he's mad and hell at you, we need to know that. So when that student transfers, we can say this was an athletically motivated transfer. They can fight it, but if we have the correct documentation worded the right way, we're not going to lose on appeal. So take a look at transfer. I kind of jumped ahead of myself. Transfer student. Take a look at when a student becomes a transfer student. And there's 3 or 4 there that are really more critical than the other ones. It's right there on page 19. Under the small a, he's been a student for 15 days or more. So let's say that a student, you start school, when you guys start, August 14th. A student's there for 5 days, 10 days, and says, this isn't for me. And they transfer. If they leave before 15 days, they're not a transfer student. Incoming freshman can check out and go somewhere else. Say he's a winter athlete. Say he's a spring athlete and doesn't play anything. The problem with the fall athletes, if you take a look at number C, if he's been tried out for practice or he's been with you for 5 days, prior to the beginning of the school year for 5 days or more, we now consider him a transfer student. And we'll get those students. We'll get the freshman that, goes out for football or volleyball, and all of a sudden they realize they're not going to play, so they want to transfer before the season starts. If they practice 5 days or more, we consider them a transfer student. And obviously if they played a contest. You guys, I think, are okay because you start August 14th. We have some schools that start still late, and they will play a game before they start practice. So if the student's playing the game, obviously he's going to be considered a transfer student. So those are some of the examples. There's a couple other ones there that go on, but I'm not going to talk about them. So really now, when we have a transfer student, so the student now is going to leave your school, and they're going to go to school B. If you take a look on the forms I handed you out, most of you know this form. It's 207. It's the third form of the pages I gave you. That form, and I'm going to give you a recommendation from my viewpoint as the new school. Hand the student the form or the parents and tell them to get it filled out and brought back to you. Now let me tell you what happens. Here again, Mike Cody calls me and says, Pete, we faxed that to Texas a month ago and it hasn't got back to me yet. Well, gee, do you think that's unusual, Mike? You know, you may fax it, you know, the beginning of the school year, they see some fax come in, it's not going to make any sense to them whatsoever. So if it's a transfer, that means that the young man maybe or young lady is moving from mom to dad. Give it to the student and say, you need to take this form to the former school and you need to get it signed and brought back to me. Put the onus on the student. Don't take responsibility for it because the parents are going to come back and they're not going to go from the athletic director, they're going to go to the vice principal, they're going to go to the principal, and they're going to blame it on all you guys when you say, no, 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 no. It's your responsibility to get the form filled out. And let them put the pressure on the school. Sometimes we'll get a phone call from an athletic director say, Pete, you know, our parent says they're not getting any help at the former school. They won't sign the form. I'll say, okay, we'll make a phone call, see what's going on. Once in a while it's been sitting there, but more often than not, we found that most of the principals are pretty reliable and they're going to get that form signed. They may not get it signed the day mom and dad come in. You're busy with the beginning of school, but they'll try to get it signed in due time. So on a transfer student, you have to do the 207. And everything's got to be filled out there by the former school. What student did he play? What did he do? Everything that's gone on. Was there a discipline issue? If you look on the back of that form, you can see the yes and the no's. Is there a discipline issue that's going on? Was he suspended? Was he expelled? Is he a pending expulsion? Was he kicked off the football team? Was he kicked off the basketball team? You know, what happened so we know what we're dealing with. And if you want to attach a letter, we would support that 100%. We also support, if you have a student transferring, send, as of September 1, send Mike Garrison an email. Say, hey, Mike, we have a student leaving our school. Let me tell you what's going on. He was, you know, kicked off the basketball team. He was kicked off the football team, you know, suspended for drinking, whatever the situation may be. So we have an idea of what's going on. Or the student athlete was unhappy. And then we download that, and that becomes part of the packet as we start reviewing the information. Now, that student then comes to your school, and you're going to fill out your portion of the backside of that form, which is number 10, which is the new school. And you're going to, you know, give us your information on whether you think there's a hardship, limited eligibility, and I'll talk about those in a second, or a sit-out period. In conjunction with that, you're also going to fill out the last page, which, believe it or not, becomes probably the most important part of the form, which is the 510. So it's got to be signed by the parents again, that there was no contact. Here again, I know there are some people that do sign it. Well, we can't, you know, we cannot attest to this because we did have contact with somebody on that campus, or we played for a certain coach or whatever, and then we'll deal with it accordingly. On the back side of that form, it's got to be signed by the coaches. Now, if you're the athletic director and you're in the office and you're saying there's no way I'm going to get hold of my head football coach, sign for them, and we're comfortable with that. Sign your name and just say for the football coach if you can't get a hold of your coach. We don't expect it to be a practice every day, but it's okay to do that. Then, if you're the new school, you have to have your coach sign off as well. That we almost do need, because we got to make sure your coaches haven't had contact with this kid or know anything about him that could cause him to be ineligible. So, when that form gets filled out, you send it to our office. Now, what happens to that form? If the student's a sophomore and they've transferred, so they haven't moved, so they've lived in the same house, 207-510 is we've lived in the same house, we're not making a valid change of residence. We're living with mom and dad, and now we're moving in with grandma. or we're living with mom and dad and moving in with the aunt and uncle. Doesn't matter. No athletic motivation, nothing else is going on. The student athlete will automatically be eligible for lower level competition in any sport he played the previous year. So let's say she played volleyball, girls basketball, and softball, 3-sport athlete. She transfers. She transfers from Consumnes Oaks to Franklin. So she is immediately eligible for those sports at the lower level. If she decides to play any one of them at the lower level, she cannot play in the playoffs at that level. So she says, I'm going to play frosh-soft volleyball. Okay, she's fine. Franklin makes the volleyball playoffs. Cannot play volleyball playoffs because she decided to play it. She wants to play varsity basketball. Then she waits to the date that I'll talk about in a second. So each sport is treated separately. Sophomore has their choice. If they did not play the sport as a freshman, the form will indicate that, and she's immediately eligible. So she didn't run cross country. She says, I'm not going to play volleyball. I don't care for that sport anymore. I want to run cross country. If she didn't run cross country as a freshman, she can do anything she wants, whatever level the coach wants to put her at. So now that decision is upon your coach and his coaching staff and whatever process you use in your school to determine at what level that student plays. We'll get phone calls from parents. Well, we want you to make the decision if my son or daughter can play varsity. No, I tried that 20 years ago. We're not going to do that anymore. So, and we get those phone calls and we direct them back to you in that situation. Let's say the student's a junior, same young lady. She plays volleyball, basketball, and softball, and she transfers. So now she's a junior. Now she's subject to what we call the sit-out period. And if you take a look on page, I'm just going to refer to the page on the bottom. I'm going to send you to, you can look at the actual dates. Here, I'm going to jump you over a little bit. Page 23, you will see the sit-out dates. So if that young lady's at your school, she's eligible for fall sports October 6th. She's eligible for winter sports January 5th. And she's eligible for spring sports April the 6th. That's the sit-out date in which she becomes eligible for the sports. No questions asked. There's no appeal. That's just the ruling. Are there any hardships that young lady who now changes schools? So if you flip back, I'm going to send you to, no, wait a minute. I'm going to send you the other way. I'm going to send you to, at the bottom of page 23 and page 24. There's 8 of them, of which we only really recognize 3. If you look at the bottom of page 23, a court-ordered transfer. So that young lady is transferring schools because it was court-ordered. It was approved by a judge. She's out of this house for mom and dad, and she's in with this house with grandma. Or she was with grandma, maybe there was some abuse. The courts have ordered it out. They submit that form. We believe it meets all the criteria. We will approve it. No questions asked. Flip the page over, a divorce situation. We will approve the first time. If a student athlete is living with mom, and I think Mike will be pretty consistent with this as well, and the family was divorced 5 years ago, and there was joint custody, and obviously mom might remarry, and maybe the young man doesn't get along with the stepdad, and now he's going to go live with dad. If there was joint custody, we will approve that. And we tell the family, we're going to give it to you one time. So now they're going to go from school A to school B, but we're not going to let them go back from school B to school A. So we're not letting them go football, basketball, baseball. No, that's not going to work. So we tell them, you got to make this decision, and we'll let you, if you want to transfer, we'll let you do that. We'll approve it under a hardship, but we're just not going to let you jump back and forth. So those 2 are critical. The third one, you as principals will play a part with our office staff, is school safety. As you know, you deal with every day school bullying, safety issues. I got 3 or 4 of them on our desk that hit this summer. It was a school safety issue. I've been getting bullied since the 1st grade. I was one. Yeah, well, now you're a junior in high school. God bless you. You made it for 10 years. I know I'm cynical. I'm talking to myself, but that's kind of the world we live in. Probably not going to approve it. We're going to call you. If somebody submits a school safety issue and you're the former school, if we don't call you, we haven't done our job. We're going to call you and ask you your information. And you know what? More often than not, if there's been school bullying, you will tell us, yeah, you know, Pete, let the student go. There's been issues here. We've had police on campus. We've had mom on campus. Get them out of here. Sometimes the principals say, that student was in here once or twice, but no, that's not school bullying. We're dealing with that. So if it is, we'll deal with it. That's probably becoming the most common one we see. Understand, when we make a decision, this is not appealable. So I, as a section commissioner, say there's no bullying. That's not appealable. We have made the decision that we're just not going to be hearing appeals and let them go and start debating with Mr. Meyer whether there was school bullying or not. We've followed up. We'll document it. If they want to walk us into the courtroom, go right ahead. Judges have said, no, we see no reason for that to go to appeal. Now, you'll see there's other ones there. There's been a lot of questions on discontinued program. Discontinued program for us is the drop of an athletic program. Starting to happen a couple years ago in the small schools with the budget cuts, where they drop softball, they drop maybe, you know, another sport, water polo. If the sport has been discontinued, we will let that student transfer. And believe it or not, we give them full eligibility if they do. Yes.
Because we have open enrollment, if we have a kid who goes on open enrollment but then does not renew it the following year and goes back to their home school.
They're subject to sit out. They'll be subject to sit out period. The only time that I have worked with that situation is, and I'm not sure anywhere in your district this is true, but districts that have an IB school, and the principal will call me and say, or somebody will call me, say, you know what, Pete, we're sending this kid back to his home school. He can't cut it. And my question is, has he been a good student? Yeah, great student. He just can't cut this academically. And we have to send him back. That's the only situation that I will approve a student to be immediately eligible. And is there an IB program in your district? You guys? So I don't even know if we've ever had that really even happen with you, Doug. I don't remember having that conversation. I know Modesto High has it, and I've dealt with their administration there where they've had a couple kids that say good kids, and they can't cut the program, so we've let them go back. But other than that, I don't remember during my time we've approved academic transfers. So the bottom line is kids are subject to this sit-out. That's kind of the statewide rule that we abide by. Remember, if a foster child is on there, we'll approve that in a heartbeat. We'll ask you to get the documentation and ask you to get the information to us. We'll try to get that clarified as soon as you can. Also remember, a student transfers to your school in, let's say, August 14th, and then at the semester transfers back to their former school and did not play a sport. We will make that student immediately eligible. As long as there's no issues going on, we let them go back to their school. Now, what we've done with our rule, and I thought we were going to come under more fire, but we have not, and it's actually worked pretty well, is we believe the rule is more simple now, but more kids get to play than they did before. Because before, we would be denying a lot of kids. And as you can imagine, Jim knows this, sometimes we would have appeals all day long for many, many days in a row that basically drove section commissioners nuts. So we went with this rule, but here's the caveat to the rule. I'm going to use an example. Student starts his freshman year at Cosumnes Oaks and everything is great. As a sophomore, he transfers to Elk Grove. Well, things go haywire. Doesn't like it. Transfer student. So now as a junior, he's going to transfer to Franklin High School. Second transfer, you're ineligible for 1 year in any sport you played the previous year unless you meet the hardship criteria. Divorce, court order, or school safety issue for the most part. So you're going to be ineligible for 1 year. And here again, folks, there's no appeal on this. If it's a second transfer, I had a couple last year that were downright ugly and they threatened and all that. I said, I'm sorry, you went, here's a freshman, here's a sophomore, now you're here as the junior. You're not going to play any sport you've played the previous 12 months. And we've been pretty effective with that.
I've had questions from students attending alternative ed schools, and here it looks like it qualifies under low achieving schools, charter schools, and there are students that would like to participate in the sports but attend those other sites. Okay, there's only, I haven't seen the list for this year, but the only two low achieving schools are nobody in this room. They're in the Del Paso Heights area. No, like if they attend Calvine or Daler or.
Okay, if you attend let's start from the back side. A continuation school student is not eligible, okay? If you attend an alternative school, you have to be on a multi-campus agreement, which I don't think, Jim, your district has them. The only one I've seen come through is on Elk Grove Charter. And who has Elk Grove Charter? I'm not sure. Some of you submit those. But alternative ed students, you can participate if your district wants to have a multi-campus agreement. But most districts don't do that anymore, because what happens on a multi-campus agreement is your site becomes responsible for not only the student that wants to play, all the kids that go to that school that could come back to your school. So we've had some schools actually jump up in divisions and say, well, we don't want this anymore, so their district will do away with it. We've actually had more schools not do away with alternative ed because they have to have a multi-school agreement. It's got to be approved by the district office. It's got to be approved by the school board. The other part of that bylaw that's not in this bylaw, but you picked up on it, is independent study students. An independent study student, according to our rules, is eligible. They're eligible to the attendance area in which they live. But if your district says we're not letting them play, I'll give you one example that does do that is Roseville. They say those students are not going to be eligible. I'll give you another example that one that allows them play is Lodi. Lodi allows their independent study students to play back at their home schools. So we have to help monitor that to know how many students there are for dues purposes. There's not a lot, but I'm not sure. Jim, what do you guys do in your district? I'm not even sure. Okay. No independent study kids? Yeah, okay. Do you have an independent study program, Tina, in your district? Okay. So some districts allow those kids to play back. Others don't. That's your guys' call. You know, independent study students, believe it or not, there's no paperwork filed. Multi-campus agreements, there's a lot of paperwork that has to be filed, and it's got to be approved by the school district, the Board of Education, and the likes of many people before that can be done. And it's got to be done by May 31st of the previous year. So, any questions on that that I might have missed, or anything that I cover? Okay, if you take a look, I'm going to talk a little bit about, if you jump over to page 25, you'll see at the top of the page, there's another hardship Board of Education ruling. And let me explain to you that does not mean the parent that's unhappy that their student is going from Consumnes Oaks to Laguna Creek, and they go to the board, and the board says, well, we approve of that, that's great. Board of Education ruling is when they make a boundary change. That's the essence of that. And I know over the time, maybe Tina remembers, we worked with Consumnes Oaks with their new school, their new student when their school opened, and getting kids to be eligible. But let's just say, for purpose of discussion, they moved the boundary line from here to here. Now all these kids are going to go to this school, School A. Well, if they say they're all going, that's what that is referencing. And we would work with the district, we would work with the school, probably take all the names, approve them in one big lump at one time, and move on. But that is what is meant by a Board of Education ruling. I believe the rule should be boundary changes in parentheses, but it states it in the content, in the text of that wording in there. If you take a look at 207 at the bottom of the page, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. And for the ADs that aren't aware, most of you should be aware, when you see a 207.1, point 2, that's a section rule. So any point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5, that is our own section rule. And what this rule is here is, this is the essence of a rule. I'll tell you the situation. It happened in Placer High School, where we had a young man came in. He was a foster child. They didn't do paperwork on it. Another school called us on it. We called the school. They admitted to it. They had to forfeit 2 football games. They appealed it. Appeals committee upheld this. State appeals panel upheld my decision after a long, drawn-out hearing. The foster care attorneys, some organization in the East Bay got their hands on it. They went to an Alameda judge. I was in court on a Friday. The judge made me stop a bus from going to a game because he was going to make the ruling over the weekend, which is not good for us. Long story short, Placer got in the playoff, and their other school in town, Colfax, got eliminated in the playoffs. The judge ruled against us and said foster children need to be allowed to play immediately should have been automatically given eligibility. The funny part of that rule is, that whole decision, if that paperwork had come in, I would have approved it in 5 seconds. we would have signed it and got the student out, but they didn't do the right paperwork. So after this was all done, and we got beat up pretty good. Spent a lot of money on this. It's statewide for the attorney, but just, I sat there and said, there's got to be an easier way. Well, the essence of what you have under 207.1 to 207.6 is the rule. And I'm going to use that rule, I'm going to use that story as the example of what this rule now means. So let's say that happened today. Placer High School would forfeit those games. And they would appeal, and I would take it to the executive committee. And you probably, conversation would go like this with the executive committee. I absolutely agree that this student would have been eligible if I had seen the paperwork. I would have approved it in a heartbeat. So I think you should overturn me, reinstate those games, and let's fine the school. That's in essence what happened in a different situation with the $1,000 fine. So they would have reinstated that young man. They wouldn't have forfeited any games. And this would have been in about week 8, so we wouldn't have been in court or any of that sort of stuff. And they would have fined Placer High School. Who knows how much? Our fines have gone anywhere from $250 to, I think, $1,500. And I don't know where the executive committee would have sat with that. So here again, I think we're trying to do our part to help you guys when paperwork goes astray. Now, we've had situations like this where the schools appealed it, and I said, no, I can't. You can take it to the executive committee, but they're not going to overturn me because I would have not made this student eligible. So the fact I wouldn't have made the student eligible, the executive committee is probably not going to overrule me. In fact, there was 2 parents, and I'll just be honest, they're from somewhere in this district. Jim might remember. They went all the way to our board of managers. Board of managers said, we're not even going to hear this case. The executive committee has already ruled on it and said, no, students ineligible, and unfortunately, that school had to forfeit, I think, 1 or 2 games early in the year. So we've tried to put something in place to help you guys. I don't know if you guys have used that rule. Has anybody had to use that rule, Jim, in your district? No. Okay. Any questions on 207? So in essence, you got the sit out, you have the hardship, second transfer, you're done for a year. And I don't know, maybe the feeling's different out there, but when a student's been in his 3rd school in 3 years, we have a problem. And it's usually tied to, more often than not, some type of athletic issues going on. 510, which some of you have heard about, it's talked about in 207, but I'm just going to reference it in 510. 510 is our undue influence bylaw. And what 510 really says, in essence, is if there's any type of undue influence, the student is going to be subject to an ineligibility. So for the most part, when we're dealing with 510 issues, we're dealing with a coach that's changed schools, and now kids are following that coach. You'd be surprised how often that happens, and the parents still don't understand after the appeal why we said no and the appeals panel says no. But if a coach changes jobs and kids follow that coach, he's not going to get the sit-out. He's going to be ruled ineligible for 1 year. That's within, it states it in the 207, it states it in the 510. That is even if the family makes a valid change of residence. So a coach gets removed from his job over Christmas, he's a football coach, and the family moves, and all of a sudden they end up at the same school, in Lodi, he's going to probably be ruled ineligible. And then, they'll go down the appeals way. So if you follow a coach, if you follow a club coach, so if you have a club coach that is also affiliated with a high school, and a number of you have those out there, or a guy coaches a club basketball team, and he's maybe the assistant coach, he could be the JV coach, he could be the assistant JV coach, he could be the freshman coach. And student transfers to that school, going to probably rule him ineligible as long as we have the information. We have gone as far as we have had students in the past where the coaches are they claim to be just the director of the program. We will rule them ineligible. So you cannot be the director of the program and say, well, I didn't coach him. I said, nah, you're the director of the program. Who knows what you're doing? I'm not following you around. But these are real stories. We've gone down that road to those appeals as well, and more often than not, almost always, we will win on those. The third one is the newest one, which is on page 50. And it's kind of what I talked about. 510E is that if the student leaves school, and this was not in our rules a couple years ago, I took one to appeal and got lost, and as I found out later, I lost on the appeal, the panel said, well, Pete, you didn't have that language in there. But what that bylaw says now, if a student leaves your school and they share dissatisfaction with the coach or use an administrator. I'm unhappy with that coach. My son's not getting playing time. We're not throwing enough. My son's a wide receiver. He's the next coming of Jerry Rice. We're not throwing him the ball. You know, you guys all hear the stories, so you know them all. We will declare that student eligible, as long as you have stepped up to the plate. If you take a look on the bottom of that, brand new language. We now have gotten to the 21st century, and we use blogs and tweets and all that sort of stuff. And we've had appeals last year. I had about 20 pages of tweets, and one young man in the middle of July declaring his dissatisfaction with the football program because he came from the football camp and he wasn't getting the ball thrown to him very much. Mom claimed he was just tweeting his girlfriend. Well, it didn't matter to us. The dissatisfaction with that football program was pretty obvious. So let me ask you a question. How many of you guys follow tweets? And does your school do that at all? It's probably been a board issue, huh? Lodi Unified does, I know that. Do you guys do that at all with kids? No? I'm getting strange looks. Nobody does? You guys don't? Yeah. Okay, so you'll...
Yes, we do that.
So you'll do it for different reasons then. Okay, yeah. I mean, the cases we've dealt with were obviously pretty specific to a sport-related reason, and the athletic director, they try to track some of these kids, and you're right, for disciplinary issues and all that sort of stuff has gone on. So we have that in our bylaw as well, folks, that, you know, we'll try to monitor those kids, and we'll try to track them, and if we get that stuff, you know, we will take that. Believe it or not, 510E is the reason for most of the transfers, especially if they're leaving your school. And you know, I mean, you know when they're a pretty good athlete and they're leaving your program and there's been discussion about them being unhappy, you can probably find some dialogue that's taking place between coaches, and they need to be willing to step up and testify. And you've heard me say that, and I continue to say it. When we do go to a hearing, we will ask you, will you be willing to testify? Because when we put you on the witness stand, and, you know, I don't want you to think like you're in a courtroom, but sometimes I feel like we're in a courtroom because attorneys are involved. We'll just ask you to tell your story. You know, what happened with this young man or young lady, and, you know, and usually that carries a lot of weight with the panel, especially when a former AD, principal, coach comes in and is willing to testify and just tell us, you know, what happened. If you're not willing to testify, there's times when we'll just say, we're going to move it on. Just give them the sit-out period and move it on, because we don't feel we'll prevail without that type of testimony. So that does happen as well. Any questions on 510? All right, Bylaw 202, accurate information. If it's discovered that a student is giving you inaccurate information, that student can be subject up to 12 to 24 months of ineligibility. And here again, I'm going to use an example because it's the best way for me to explain some of this stuff. Is Debbie Holmerud, who was our president, was the principal at Lincoln High School. And about 5 years ago, she called me and said, Pete, I'd like to meet with you. So I went down one day and chatted with her, and she says, we have been led to believe we have 6 or 7 freshmen that are going to school here that are not living in our attendance area. And we're going to be doing some investigation, so you may be hearing further from us on that. Well, it took about a month, and I had 5 of them on my desk. And there was 5 kids that they tracked down that claimed they were living here, and they did house checks, and they weren't living there, all the things that you guys are used to. And these were all incoming freshmen. So every one of them, we just, no, 4 of the 5 we hit for 12 months, and 1 we went for 24 months because she was just belligerent with everybody. And everyone went to appeal, and everyone, we prevailed because of the false and fraudulent information. So if you have that, and it's something you want to get control on, you need to document it, get it to us, and we'll follow through with that. What we have done with this bylaw, and it's really, really critical, and it's on the following page, on page 13, and it's called the SJS rule. It's under 202.2, and this is a residential eligibility issue. So now let's say a student has made a valid change of residence, So Mike Cody submits a form, football team, young man moves in, there's issues, this kid may not be living there. Mike calls the office, says, Pete, you know, this kid's living there. As far as we can see, he's living there. So all of a sudden, more information comes out. Now they're in week 7, and they find out the student's not living there. So Mike Cody really is an ineligible athlete. You have to forfeit, and this is a residential eligibility issue only. So if Mike calls us and says, okay, here's the story on Bill. Bill never really, said he was living there. We found out he's really living over here. We've just took him off the football team. What this bylaw allows us to do is declare that student ineligible, and we will go after him for 2 years of fraudulent information. But Franklin High School does not forfeit any football games as long as they did their diligent work right up front to make sure the student was eligible. We've used that a number of times. We'll have schools call us and say, Pete, we checked the house, you know, it's a rental agreement, we understand that, but the family was there, we checked the bedroom. Then we find out, and usually it comes this, we get this information about a week before the playoffs. You need to understand that, because everybody holds it to the last minute. And then they call us up and they say, you know, they'll call and say, we just had another check because we got some, you know, sometimes their own parents say, we don't think that student's living there anymore. And they find out he's not, so we will take the step of declaring the student eligible. We have no problem going after them, but we're not going to make the school forfeit games. I can't carry that any further than just a residential eligibility issue. If we could have, obviously Consumers Oaks would have been treated differently last year on their situation. But that's just a residence eligibility issue on a student, where they're living or not living.
Well, that's what I was going to say. On your Form 206, the parents are asked, and you're supposed to verify the 2 bullet points. We found out the hard way that the section can't help you on the second bullet point. The first one is about residency. Am I saying this right? On the 206, where it says, both are not on the form, but what we found out the hard way was that while they can protect you on the residency issue, which Pete was just talking about, on 206, they were not in that same position to help us when we got fraudulent information about their affiliation with the club. That was the sticking point of the whole thing, was that we really didn't know that this kid played for a club team that had some of our players and a dad associated with it. So that's why we were caught unaware. I think the hardest part, but it was important for all of you to know, because this was our hard lesson, we appealed. We appealed saying, we get it. We took the kid off the team the minute we found out about it. We're not asking that the kid be reinstated. We're just asking that we don't forfeit 18 games. And so we appealed it. We lost the appeal, and I think in the end we lost because the panel didn't believe our basketball coach could be that dumb. Isn't that about right?
You probably have it right.
Right, because they just could not get to the idea that our coach would somehow not know that a high-profile kid who'd done everything else right had come in, but he somehow didn't know he was affiliated with a club program with our kids on it. But our administration, none of us knew this. But the hard lesson learned was, and this is where we pushed back and found the line, your coaches have to know, because that was not good enough for the appeals hearing, was it? When we went in and said, we don't know, we can prove we didn't know, we can take it all the way up to, and they just kept asking, really, your basketball coach doesn't know this? And there was some documentation that he found out midway through the year, and I think they're thinking, then he should have told us that day. Right? So that's what's really hard about this, is that at the end, your coaches have to know. And we found out the hard way that even though they didn't know till the second term, that's how our basketball coach found out. When the term switched, kids came into a new batch of kids came in. And he just overheard some kids talking about this kid playing. That was literally the only way he knew what happened. But that's how responsible we are. We lost our appeal because he knew that at the beginning of term 2, and he didn't tell us so we could tell the section. The dumbest thing of it all is if the family had just put an attachment and attached it to the 2, they probably would have never had this problem.
Well, we would have had an appeal before it happened.
Right.
If I had denied it, the appeal would have taken place in middle of November. So Johnny would have either got eligible or ineligible before it even would have happened.
They had told us, Pete, if we had just
Yeah, I would have investigated, and there's a pretty good chance based on, well, I mean, it's post-knowledge information. Let's just say if I declared the kid ineligible, they would have gone through the process. You wouldn't have forfeited 16 games, though. Right. I mean, it would have been done up front.
Is there a chance you would have just had them sit out 30 days?
No, it would have been all or nothing. It would have been all or nothing, yeah, I guarantee you that. So, you know, I'm not, yeah, everything that Consumer Stokes did during that appeal was absolutely right. That's why I cannot emphasize enough that when you get these high-profile athletes in, you need to be talking to them and find out what's going on. And you guys know, I think you know who they are. We kind of hear about it. You know, if you're not sure, call us, because I'll tell you who does know is Will DeBoer in our office. He knows before you know when the student's transferring, because he'll tell me, hey, Pete, so-and-so's transferring. How'd you get that? I got it. Don't worry, I got it. I found out. And it's unbelievable how it pops up, you know, sometime later on. So that, I'm not saying our system's perfect, folks. In no way, shape, or form it is. And I sure understand where Consumer Stokes was coming from in that situation. But you need to dig around and try to find out and make sure. Yes, question.
Okay, I just had 2 questions. So you said a valid change of residence. So say a kid moves from Los Angeles, but in Los Angeles they went from Dorsey to Cal Lutheran, or I think Lutheran High School, something, then they come up here and go to Florin, but it's a valid change of residence. Are they eligible, or?
Yeah, valid change of residence overrides everything. Okay. So if they went from school A, Dorsey, to the school you mentioned and didn't make a valid change, right, use the transfer, and then they make a valid change, right, and all that family moves, right, they're eligible. Okay. It's when you don't move, right, that you don't move your second transfers when you're ineligible.
Okay.
Valid change, let me clarify, a valid change of residence, we do not call a transfer. Right. In our world, that's not considered a transfer. A transfer is when a student changes schools, not with the same family.
Right. And
okay,
then,
that might help you a little bit.
No, I understand. Number 2, the 5 days of participation. So if the coach is doing some out-of-season club or travel with the team, you know, before the season starts, and then the kid transfers, the 5 days starts when he's doing the out-of-season activities, or? No,
first day, 5 days starts for us August the 11th.
Okay.
That's our first day. What you do out-of-season is your own business.
Well, what about, you know, for the sports that are in school that start during the time school is in?
From our first day of practice.
Okay.
You know, our first day of practice is August the 11th. What happens before that, you know, does not matter. You know, so, I mean, like you can talk about fall, winter athlete, same thing. Right. The 5 days before, you know, does not matter to us.
So that's what, yeah. So
but don't forget, a student's going to be a transfer in November because they've been in school all fall. The 5 days is really for the fall athlete. That's where that's going to, you know, it's going to catch more often than not. You know what you guys need to know, and you raise an interesting point, and I'll tell everybody in this room this. The biggest concern I have is that if you tell a student in June, your basketball coach says in June, you're not going to make my team next year. And I have this happen all the time. So you say it's athletically motivated. Really, it's athletically motivated. Basketball season, when Jim and I coached, started November. Same thing for Hank. Started November the 6th or November the 7th. You're telling a student athlete in June. If you told me in June I was going to make the basketball team, I'd probably want to transfer too. I don't consider that athletically motivated. I'm transferring. I'm a good kid. You just told me I'm not going to make the team. So I've often wondered why schools sometimes, I know you allow it, but I'm not sure it's the smartest thing in the world, because when that student transfers, I find it hard to believe that I'm not going to tell them I'm not going to tell you it's athletically motivated. The student wants a chance to play. I had this situation a couple years ago, and the former school went crazy with me. I said, well, your coach told the kid he was going to not make the team. Once the principal found that out, she says, I get it. Thank you very much. So you need to be aware of that as well, that when we sit in the office, we also have issues we have to deal with, and that's where the sit-out period kind of covers certain things. But if the coach says, you're done, I don't want you around for the summer and you're not going to play basketball for me, he or she may say, well, I want to play, so I'm going to transfer schools. So.
One more. Which form was it that you said you can sign for the coach?
207-510. 207-510.
207-510.
The 510 form.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, no, I take that back. Let me clarify. No, the back of the 207 form. and the 510, both forms you can sign for. Questions? Yeah, Mike.
Can you go to, on page 49, it says under bylaw 510, there's a note next to it that says 9th can happen. Can you explain what that means?
Hold on. Yeah.
Page 49.
Let me, you want me to explain what now?
You have a note written on the side where it says 9th can happen. Does that mean that in...
Oh, what that means is that 510A, that's when we can just go after undue influence for a 9th grader. That's the question that I think Bob just asked. If there's an incoming 9th grader, we can nail them for undue influence for 1 year. So that's a question that gets asked a lot. It can happen for sophomores, juniors, and seniors, but an incoming 9th grader can. We're never going to be capable of monitoring incoming 9th graders playing for club coaches. We just would never have the resources to do that. But if it was brought to our attention and we had solid information that a student came because a coach recruited him to come to a school as a freshman, and we move forward, that's what I meant by that note, is that we can go after a 9th grader as well for that. Highly unlikely, but it's becoming more and more of a common question that's asked, about all the club level that's going on, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And, what normally happens is the parent tells us at the end of the freshman year that they were recruited at the beginning of the year, and all of a sudden their son or daughter's not playing, so they're unhappy. I said, well, gee, why did you allow this to all happen as well if you knew it was illegal? And they kind of just walk away. Or they want to just leave and don't want to be bothered by it. So, yeah, Hank.
Yeah, I just have a comment. I think the biggest challenge for us right now is the residential eligibility, the fraudulent information that parents or guardians provide. At least at our site, as far as I can remember, and looking back, those are the ones that they're time consuming. They can be emotionally difficult. And I think it would be good if the support we could get from the section and from the district for that matter, and which I know we will get, is that the penalty be stiff, severe. If they've lied, if they have not told us the truth, they shouldn't be eligible for a year or whatever the case might be. But after you do all that work, and if it's just a slap in the wrist, it's just going to continue. But for us, that's the biggest challenge I see right now.
So in terms of what are you, I guess I'm going to go back to what are you asking for? Because under the one bylaw, we would not make you forfeit if you did your due diligence, right, but we would hit the student for a year.
Yeah, and I think that's good. We need to do something to get parents' attention. That's not cool.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I think, to be honest, during my tenure, that and the undue influence in the athletic recruiting is just something that I just won't I won't tolerate, and hopefully it'll continue. Any other questions? I know you guys are extremely busy. You got a horde of kids that are going to wander on your campus next Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Given that the AAU coaches who have these programs that are tied to our high schools, and we should have some kind of leverage with those people. What kind of leverage does CIF have with respect to gaining access to those AAU rosters?
Well, we were better when before people knew to take their rosters off the line at the end of the summer, because we used to use them a lot for hearings. But we don't have immediate access to them any more than you do. I guess my point is, if we hear something's going on, I put Will on the hunt, and sometimes they'll say I couldn't find a roster. Sometimes they will find a roster, student name is on that roster. Sometimes you see a picture, a team picture. There's a lot of different things you download, but we don't have immediate access to that information.
So with respect to that, what would constitute due diligence on the school's behalf if you have a reluctant coach who's, I don't have the rosters, I don't know what you're talking about? I mean, do we do a web search? Do we go to the association and try to, I mean, do we look at box scores? What do we do?
I mean, I'm not sure I understand your question. I can't tell you what to do, but if I asked the coach if he had contact with these kids and he did, and he tells me he didn't, he's probably not going to be coaching anymore.
Well, I understand that.
I mean,
Right.
he's going to be done at some point. I mean, your head coaches of your programs need to know what's going on in your club programs in terms of what's going on. I had probably one of the best questions asked from a Sheldon coach Monday night. It was a track person in the track program. And he says, okay, Pete, I coach track, and I don't know if he was the head coach or not. I'm not sure. He says, and I run a club. I said, okay. And he says, so I have let's say a student athlete at Bradshaw Christian that wants to run for my club, and we know that he or she's going to transfer to Sheldon next year. If I were you, I would tell that young lady or young man, I don't want to see hide nor hair from you till the day you enroll at Sheldon High School. Just stay away from me for a whole year. I had the same thing in Tracy last year. We have one club volleyball program. 3 high schools all play. So a young lady plays for the club coach, and then she transfers to that school in the fall. Well, following the coach, we had no choice. So after the hearing, the coach said, what am I supposed to do? I said, when you meet with your club at the beginning of the year, you better say, if any of you are going to come to, I think it's West High School next fall, get up and leave. Now, I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you until we come out for volleyball practice. I don't want you to be part of my club. So I guess my point is you got to rely on the integrity of your coaches to do the right thing. Because the coaches know. I'm not going to lie to you guys. You guys know this as well as I do. Hank knows this from the days he was coaching. Coaches know more than what we know what's going on. They know where all the cheating is going on. They know where all the legal activity is going on. And some of those coaches I would not want part of my staff that know that because they're also part of it. That's something that's for each one of you to figure that out. But they have a pretty good sense of what's going on. We're not going to catch all this. We're just trying to prevent AAU and club from dominating what's going on at high school. I'm not sure we're doing as good a job as we can, especially in the sport of basketball, which I think is our biggest problem right now, more so than any sport we deal with. Yeah.
Does that include travel baseball?
Travel baseball. You could talk anything that's off season. You could start in the fall and go volleyball. You could you could have your. I've even dealt with club running teams for cross country, water polo. We've had our share of hearings. Basketball. We've had our hearings in wrestling, off-season wrestling programs. Baseball. We've had our hearings in softball. There probably is. I don't think I've had a hearing in badminton yet, but I think almost every other sport we have. So there's clubs all across the board that are going on, and there are some, I'm not going to mention any names, but there are some coaches that are really great. They, as I've told coaches, that's great that the kids play in club. I think that's the best thing in the world. But let the student athlete alone when the season comes. Don't try to drag them to your school. Let them go back to the school where they belong, or wherever that should be. So.
The new ruling with the contact going for next year, 2015, when the summer comes around, if the kids are attending, say, offense-defense camp with contact, does that fall under the California
Yeah, there's going to be this fall, at the Fall Federated Council, there's going to be a document submitted, and I've dealt with the state office, and I think what you're going to come out of our office and our section is let's wait until the October Federated Council and see what that document looks like, in terms of what contact will be allowed and not allowed. But it will be different because when you read is it AB 25? I can't remember the exact number. It actually says that full contact out of season will not be allowed. So it's going to look different. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. How it's going to look different, I don't want to address that yet because the committee is going to come up with some language to deal with that. The one law that's in effect this year, the CIF bylaw, is the 18 hours of practice. And I think most of you are aware of that. I know Jim was pretty influential at the state level with that, with his committee. No more than any 4 hours in one day. And if you have a contact, it's 3 hours, Jim. Isn't that what we were, 3 hours? But you take a look at 18 hours, that really should work. Unless you go back to the old days when Hank was coaching and he ran 3 practices in one day.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that actually is, you know what? I told our office staff, get ready. because you're going to get more phone calls from parents now than you ever have. Because we used to get phone calls from parents all the time anyway saying, is it legal for kids to be practicing for 5 hours? And we used to be able to say, well, that's a school district rule. Now, we're going to have to pick up the phone and call you and say, we just got a phone call from a parent that, you know, your soccer team was out there for 5 hours. So
the teen camps to where you give them the uniforms from the school.
yeah,
They get
that's going to be, that's the new law.
Go to
There-
the
there's-
Cal camp or
yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
That's, that California state law, CIF is going to write a rule. You're going to see language on that. The other thing I jumped into is the 18 hours a week now as well, which I think most of your coaches, your good coaches know what's going on. You just want to make sure you keep your coaches under wraps because parents are going to monitor that rule for us. So. Any other questions? I can be of any help. You know, you can always call the office. Most of you know John Williams. He's be very aware of me. Mike's going to be new, trying to figure it all out. But between them and I'll be around, we'll make sure we help you guys. And with Rod involved, we'll, you guys they've always done things the right way. Unfortunately, we had a couple things happen this last year, and we feel bad with Consumers Oaks, but it is what it is, and there's not much we can do about it at the time. Whether that changes or not, I don't know. But as we've discussed, club sports is an issue and a concern that we will constantly be dealing with. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and good luck with the start of the school year.